When you got $40,000 on the line, big problem. How do you protect your deal? Episode number 24, we're going to talk about protecting your deals. Put that away there. I've lost real estate deals in the past because I've got a contract from a seller, and then for some reason, they do what I call going dark. They don't return your phone calls anymore. Maybe somebody paid them more for the property, maybe they decided they want to sell the property, or maybe somebody that you sent to the property went around you and they're trying to close without you. If you're working with private sellers, you're doing a lot of work. You're spending money on marketing. You're doing things that are costing you time. Wait, oh, gosh, son of a gun, son of a gun, son of a gun. All right, I'm gonna do it right here.
All right, kiddos, here's a fairy tale for ya. It's called
How to Protect Your Deals, Part 1.
There was an apartment complex that I put under contract. It was like, I think I put under contract for $870,000. Now, I normally don't deal with apartment complexes because that's not what I market to, but he brought it to me. I recognized it was a motivated situation, so I stepped in and I helped him negotiate a deal with the apartment owner. The guy, as a motivated seller, he needed to sell it. We negotiated a price of $870,000 for this apartment complex. Everything was great. We had the contract signed, earnest money was in, and we were moving forward with our due diligence and doing inspections. Basically, we'd spent a lot of time and effort doing this, moving forward. After we'd done all our inspections and done title work and everything, we actually found a buyer who was willing to pay more than we were. We found a cash buyer for $910,000, so we had a $40,000 assignment fee locked in. Now, the whole deal was done. I'd signed up the contract with the seller, I had my buyer in place, they had their cash in place, and everything was ready. But when we're trying to do the transaction coordination, calling up the seller, what happens? They went dark. They stopped answering our phone calls. This is a big problem. When you got $40,000 on the line, big problem. How do you protect your deal? When we finally got a hold of him, he was like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not going to sell that anymore. I don't want to sell that. And he was just being really weird. And come to find out, he didn't want to sell it because somebody else had found out he was selling it, and they offered him more money. And he's like, well, you don't have a binding contract, this and that. I said, no, we do have a binding contract. We've been doing due diligence for a week. We're moving forward to close this thing. We're closing on such and such a day. And he said, well, no. And he kept trying to weasel out of it. And I said, look, you got an offer for hire for somebody else, and you're willing to sell your integrity for whatever amount of money that is. And he didn't have a good answer for that, but nonetheless, he wasn't going to sell me the property, so he sold it to somebody else. From that, I learned a lesson.
I think you're going to win the game. It all depends how you handle this Final Jeopardy category.
Part 2.
Let me tell you about deal number 2. We're actually in multiple different states, and from that, I learned to protect myself, which I'm going to talk about in 1 second. So I did this protection, and on deal number 2 that I'm going to tell you about was a property in another state. My acquisition manager had the contract signed. We had everything done. All the T's were crossed, all the I's were dotted, earnest money was in, and we were good to go. Seller tries to go dark. We later find out that there was another investor involved that felt like he had a contract too, and they went to closing and tried to close, but why couldn't they close?
You had a contract. You had something.
Because I had my protection. Now, it wasn't a sword like this. My protection was this. It's called a notice of interest. So what I did was this. When we get a contract signed, we just make it a point to file a notice of interest, which is basically this piece of paper, this form right here, that lets people know that we have an interest in the property by virtue of a contract. Just putting everyone on notice. Look, we have a contract, we have an interest in this property. Now, what happened in that second story was he tried to go close and the seller wasn't returning our phone call. They saw the notice of interest on title. They called us up and they said, well, what's this notice of interest? And then we produced our contract and said, here's our contract. And he said, well, our contract predated his contract. So, of course, the seller had to come back, sell the property to us. We ended up buying the property. They got their money. Everything was good. And we went along the way. Now, they would have just sold that property to somebody else had we not have a notice of interest filed. So it's very, very, very important. We want to make sure that we have to be included in the conversation. And 99% of the time, the sellers do exactly what they say they're going to do. It's just that 1% of the time that maybe a buyer tries to go around you or something weird happens and the sellers decide they don't want to call you back. The notice of interest just ensures that you're a part of that conversation.
Part 3.
So a few months ago, my acquisition manager was out and got a contract on a property. It was a great deal. We did everything we were supposed to do. We filled out the contract, we deposited the earnest money, and the seller was totally happy with the arrangement. But then about a week later, a real estate agent contacted him and somehow talked him into listing his property, even though he had a contract with us and we filed a notice of interest and everything. So he shouldn't have ever listed that property. That real estate agent was in the wrong, but he listed it up nonetheless. They put it on the market, and in one day, they got an awesome offer. It was a great offer that was so much better for the seller. And then he's in this little quandary, right? Because they pulled up title, and we had a notice of interest on that. We were buying the property for less money, but that was going to be worse for the seller. So I recognize that it was better for the seller's circumstances to be able to sell that property to this end buyer and make more money. So I sit down, I talk to him, I recognize it really wasn't anything he was trying to do wrong, and it was definitely a better deal for him. So I decided I would tear up my contract, release my notice of interest, and let him move forward and do what was best for him. Now that's the thing with having a notice of interest. It allows you to have a heart as well. It allows the seller to come back to the conversation and you be included in that conversation, and you can do what feels right, what feels best. And I want to tell you guys, always try to operate with integrity and be above board in your business, because that's more important than anything else. It's more important than making more money than everything. So I promise you, do right by other people, and they'll do right by you. Let me tell you guys something. If you're going to use this a notice of interest, I recommend you do, and we file it on all of our deals just to make sure that the sellers remember that they're in contract with us, okay? And 99% of the time, it's never a problem. They have integrity, they know what they're doing, it's a win-win situation. It doesn't really, they're getting what they want. It's just that 1% of the time that they found somebody to pay a little higher price. Or if we'd sent a buyer there that we didn't quite have a great relationship with, and they talk to the seller and say, hey, do you know that I'm buying the property for $10,000 more than you're selling it for? And then they just try to have this little collusion among themselves and go around us. That happens sometimes. That happens a lot. So to protect yourself, you file a notice of interest. But this is a very, very key and important part. So make sure you're listening here. Turn up your hearing aids, okay? You have to have permission to file a notice of interest. And here's how you get permission to file a notice of interest. When you're signing the contract, whatever contract you have with them, make sure you get permission from them in your contract to file a notice of interest referencing your purchase agreement. So here's exactly what it says in mine. It says, seller authorizes buyer, us, to record a notice of interest on the property evidencing this purchase agreement. If you have that in your purchase contract, then you're good. You can file a notice of interest referencing what you've got, and you're protected. If you don't have that, even if you have a valid contract, they can come back and say that you're clouding their title wrongfully. And there's strict, there's lien laws that have real teeth in them. If you're wrongfully clouding somebody's title, or even if you're doing it and properly, or even if you had an interest in that property, but you didn't have permission to file a notice of interest, you can get in big trouble. So you don't want to do that. You want to do that to somebody's title. So there it is right there. If you want to protect your deals, notice of interests are key. So if you guys want to see a copy of a notice of interest, you want to see what that paperwork looks like, go to I Love Real Estate Stories /notice, or there's a link right here in this video and you can check it out there. Simple paperwork, but I promise you, it can save you tens of thousands of dollars with your deals. And it helps the sellers with their memories sometimes. Because sometimes they sign a contract with you for $100,000, everything's good, they're getting exactly what they want, then somebody else comes along to give them $105,000, and their memory gets a little foggy. Who were they selling the property to again, and how much? Now, wait a second, did we sign something? Did we have an agreement? Were you moving forward to buy my property? Doesn't happen a lot, but if it does happen, a notice of interest on title helps the sellers remember who you are.
I think you're going to win the game. It all depends how you handle this final Jeopardy category.
So if you like that last video, the best compliment you can pay me is by sharing it. So I would love to see who actually likes this video by those who share this video with others they feel like might benefit. So I would appreciate you so much for watching the stuff we're doing on I Love Real Estate Stories. Jason and I love putting these out for you, but share the love. I feel like I gotta have my hand behind my back. Mommy! Where's that from?